Welcome to Bold Strokes Books Bookathon. Thanks everyone for tuning in. We're very excited tonight to bring you our Gay Fiction, Gay Lives session. Jerry Wheeler is going to be your moderator. Just a couple of quick housekeeping items. If you go to the top right of your screen and click on Gallery View, you'll be able to see everyone at once. And if you have a question, just type it in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. If you have comments, compliments, whatever, you can type those in the chat roll. We'll also be posting a flash sale in the chat roll later in the panel session. But without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Jerry and let y'all get started.
Hi, how is everybody today?
Doing great.
Great.
We are missing one panelist, but I'm sure that Carson will be able to track him down and beat him unmercifully. So we'll start out with panel bios. So we'll start out with Lee Patton. Now, Lee, a native of California's Mendocino coast, Lee Patton has enjoyed life in Colorado since college. His fiction and poetry have been widely published, and his plays produced nationwide. His newest novel, Every Summer Day, is forthcoming from Bold Strokes Books. Prizes include the Colorado Authors League Short Fiction Award, Best Mystery Finalist in the Lambdas, the Borderlands Playwrights Prize, and the Ashland New Playwrights. He received an MA in Fiction from the University of Denver's writing program. So let's introduce Lee Patton. And Lee, would you say a few words about Every Summer's Day? Maybe give us a capsule summary and tell us what to look forward to. Hello?
Sorry, Jerry, can you hear me?
Yes.
I just had a lot of static on that last part. Did you ask me a question?
Oh, yeah. I read your biography, and I said, could you give us a capsule description of your book and what we're looking forward to?
My new book?
Yes.
Yeah, it is basically a family story. It is about a pair of brothers who are very close, and the younger brother is telling the story of his brother's unexpected brain tumor that takes hold of him very quickly one summer, and it's kind of sends his whole the younger brother's summer into upheaval. He had planned to keep this journal of every summer, which is where the title comes from, and instead it kind of turns into a chronicle of coping with this family crisis.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Interesting. I've read all of these books. I've edited all of these books, and I think they're all marvelous. All of them are just terrific. So we'll start next. Next, we'll go to David Peterson. David Peterson's bio is: David S. Peterson lives in Wisconsin with his husband Alan and two friendly cats, Kona and Hilo. Hilo, is that right?
Yep, that's right.
Okay. He enjoys studying classic ocean liners, floor plans, and historic homes. A film noir and mystery enthusiast, David is the author of Death Comes Darkly, Death Goes Overboard, selected by the GLBT Roundtable of the American Library Association for the 2018 Over the Rainbow book list. Death Checks In, which was a Lambda Literary Award finalist last year, 2019, and Death Overdue, coming in July of 2020. So David, could you tell us a little bit about Death Overdue?
Sure.
Tell them, I know.
Here it is. There it is.
Very good.
So Death Overdue is the fifth in the series of the Heath Barrington murder mystery series. So Heath Barrington is a gay detective who has a life partner or boyfriend who's a Milwaukee police officer as well, and they serve crimes kind of via similar to Agatha Christie type stuff. So they're all set in the 40s and mostly in and around the Milwaukee area and Chicago. And Death Overdue actually is kind of a twist in the book because someone finds out about Heath and Alan. And obviously in the 40s you had to be very closeted, very careful. So this person starts blackmailing Heath, and of course, as blackmailers sometimes do, he ends up dead, and Heath becomes a suspect. And due to a few too many martinis, of which I may or may not have been known to indulge in myself, he can't even recall for sure if he is innocent or not. So that's kind of the gist of that story.
Excellent, excellent. Next up, we have St. John Carp. St. John is an ornamental hermit who likes to live near exciting things so he can not go to them. He was born in Sydney and wrote Quake City after living in San Francisco for 10 years, which is pretty much the same thing as spending 10 years trapped on an alien planet with a brain slug living under your hat. If he's ever in a plane crash with a cargo hold full of Twinkies, he's determined to eat the other survivors before he eats the Twinkies. So that's St. John. Could you tell us a little bit about Quake City, St. John?
Thank you, and yeah, good evening. Quake City is sort of a comedy horror set all in one night in a gay bar in San Francisco, and as the night progresses, it gets more and more out of hand, and it's basically every terrible date and bad night out you've ever had all in one night.
And there's also a time travel element too, isn't there?
There is too, yeah. A bit of horror in there, bit of science fiction, bit of everything.
Okay, all right. The next panelist is Louis Barr. And Louis Barr assisted in the development of civil rights bills and worked as a civil rights litigator for 40 years. His modern detective thriller, Everyday People, includes a climax some may predict, but a final twist leads to a denouement no one will see coming. So welcome, Louis. Could you tell us a little bit about Everyday People?
Certainly. Film star Diana Danning's son vanishes after leaving a Hollywood dive bar. The cops think that he's just another West Side princeling off on a binge, so they don't find anything worth searching for right away. Diana hires private detective, bisexual private detective, I should say, excuse me, Clint Still, to search for her son. This story, as mentioned, has a climax that I intentionally wrote so that readers might guess it if they're paying attention. I won't comment on that.
I didn't, but I was only the editor. So.
You didn't? Really? Well, good. I'm impressed. Yeah. But they may guess that, but the denouement they won't see coming. The villain in this story will seize a reader's attention and run wild into the night with it. I wouldn't suggest reading him alone. My stories tend to be a bit on the dark side too. I would suggest that if you'd like more of a synopsis, go to my website, lewisbarrauthor.com, and it'll tell you everything you need to know.
Okay, great. All right. So so totally unrehearsed, this lead-in question, because we've all seen these questions before, right? The lead-in question is, the panel description talks about the intersection between fiction and reality. And each of you individually, do you drive headlong towards those intersections, or do you avoid them like the plague? And maybe we'll start with David.
Sure. I definitely, as far as that intersection goes, I definitely rush right towards it. Mainly because I write historical fiction, so I have to get as much into the reality of history as possible. I try really hard to make sure I get all my facts right. When I'm doing a hotel in Chicago, for example, I research, what they ate and how they dressed and what they drank and how much a cab fare cost and were there elevator operators, or was it by that time, electric? So I definitely try as far as possible to meld the fiction and the reality together and make it as realistic as possible.
Okay, Julian.
Yes. Could you repeat the question?
Did I not? Yeah, I didn't even do your bio, did I?
No, but that's okay.
I know
Save the
that.
best for
Thank you. Thank you. Let me go back to that. I'm sorry. I was getting a little ahead of myself here. Julian Lopez is the author of the novel Missed Connections and this new anthology, Cirque de Freak and Other Tales of Horror, most recently published by Bold Strokes Books. He is the author of several short stories published by Allison Publications that have been included in various anthologies. Julian is a graduate from California State University, Long Beach. He's a designer in interior architecture, particularly with healthcare design. He spends his spare time writing fiction and is freelanced for various LA-based publications. Julian considers himself a true Angelino, living in LA, due to his pleasure for exploring LA's hiking trails, beaches, restaurants, and those hidden vintage shops where he enjoys finding vintage items to restore. So welcome, Julian. I'm so sorry that I almost missed you. Could you give us a little synopsis of Cirque?
Sure, and thank you for that nice intro. That was a long one. Yeah, it's a compilation of short horror stories. Pretty much anything you of the things that go bump in the night. That's what it's about. There's a little bit of horrorness to it, but also there is premises of romance. So there's a combination of that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
With villains
and your book is the exception that it's a book of short stories.
Correct. It is.
Okay. So going back to the question that I forsaked your introduction for, with the section of fiction and reality, do you avoid those intersections or do you go rushing towards them?
I think to answer your question, I don't necessarily go for them.
Okay. How about you, Lee?
Yeah, I was just thinking this is kind of a terrifying question because I seem to be the only guy on the panel who's writing sort of contemporary realistic fiction, and my whole all of my work kind of hinges on that intersection. That's writing stuff about family, writing stuff about non-family stuff that has aspects of my family in it or my past experiences. So I'm constantly with this question, and you probably tell it makes me very uncomfortable because I feel like I think about it too much or I concentrate on it too much, I'm going to lose my mojo.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's not a very good answer. It's a scary question.
It is. It's a big question. Which is why I thought I'd lead up.
That I do that with my characters, because I want them to. I want their emotions to be sincere. I want that to be based on real things, but I don't have the same hang-ups about historical fiction as Mr. Peterson has, because I've written historical fiction and paid absolutely zero attention to historical accuracy. That can only get in the way, in my opinion. History buffs will appreciate an accurately written novel, I'm sure, but my favorite westerns are always the terrible 1960s British-made westerns where they've all got English accents because none of the actors could do the American accent properly. I love the campness of it. I love the ridiculousness of just playing with our ideas of a historical period rather than anything that actually happened.
Mm-hmm. Okay. How about you, Lewis? What's your relationship to those intersections?
Interesting question. Yes. Well, number one, I also write contemporary fiction, just for the record, and I have a tendency. It depends on where the storyline is going, and whether, like John Grisham, I want to go out and totally bend the law until it breaks, which I do sometimes in my fiction. Sometimes I stick reality very closely. Kind of a mixture of the two, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, I know the One of the things I'm liking about this panel is that everybody has written some very different books. I mean, they're not all the same sort of books. We've got horror stories, we've got detective thrillers, we've got Lee's family drama. Was there a specific incident that drove you to explore the subjects that you all wrote about? So and I guess what I'm asking is, what was the real genesis of those books? So who wants to start that? I don't want to point out anybody, but I will. Okay, go, Dave.
Well, as I mentioned earlier, my books are historical. They're set in the 40s, and personally, I've always been a little bit of an old soul. I love the 40s. It's always been one of my things growing up. My contemporaries were listening to REO Speedwagon, and I was listening to Benny Goodman, and Doris Day. So I've always been drawn to that time period, and I thought it would be interesting to explore what gay life was like for somebody in the 40s. And I get a lot of questions about, well, was it absolutely miserable? Were they awful? I mean, it was a rough time because you had to be very closeted and secretive, and you could be thrown in jail or given a lobotomy for it. But through Heath and Alan, I show that there's also a lot of love and a lot of hope for the future. And so that was my genesis for writing historical gay mysteries. And not to I love mysteries, and I'm gay, so the two of them kind of go together.
Okay. How about you, St. John?
Oh, this is a good question, because although I mentioned that Quake City has a very sort of heightened reality and it gets quite surreal and strange towards the end, it's very strongly based in like actual things that have happened when I've been at a bar or been on a terrible date. And the specific incident that kicked off that novel was I went to a gay club in Southampton, I think, and I was wearing a hat and someone asked to borrow it off me, and that person lent it to someone else. And over the course of the evening, this hat must have been on the head of absolutely everyone in the club. And then at about 2 a.m., I had to try and get it back from whoever had it at that moment, and she did not want to let it go. So I love this idea of following a hat around a nightclub and seeing into everyone's different nights and how they cross over and how they may be completely unaware of each other.
Okay. How about, I'm interested to see what Julian is going to answer for this question because those are really some fanciful tales. So how do you, what were the real genesis of those tales?
So thanks for asking. For me personally, I've always enjoyed a good horror tale. And, I grew up reading, Stephen King, Poe, and all these, Conrad, all these different writers. And what I got out of that was a good horror story. And I felt, and of course I read, all types of literature and gay horror now. And I feel that there isn't a lot out there that covers something that I love, which is just a good old horror story. Obviously characters, in my book are gay, but the vampires, the villains, the way things are that I portrayed them brings me back to what enabled me to write them, which is good old classic horror. Getting that sense of scariness and yeah. So that I think is the motivator, the main motivator for me.
Okay, all right. How about you, Lewis?
Well, my husband and I used to live in LA. So I love LA, but boy, it's weird there sometimes. And which is why my stories are always set in LA, because nothing is ever too strange or horrific. It may have happened, probably did. My husband was a cop there, and boy, I used to hear some real horror stories. And he worked the night shift for a number of years, and I never slept until I heard the door unlocking. It was do I miss it? Yeah, I do. Would I live there again? No. And most of my stories come out of the air, I guess, really. It's the genesis. It's just like, what if we were to do this, and take it from there.
Okay. How about you, Lee?
Yeah, I realized that my current novel, Every Summer Day, actually has a very concrete inspiration and beginning, which was that in the 90s, my brother was ill, and he was dying of an AIDS-related condition. And it was a very protracted, long, horrible experience. But he seemed to be doing better at one point. And at the beginning of that summer, I very much like the protest. And I was, because my brother was getting better, I was kind of feeling like I had some writing. You know, I was curious about where summers go. In 5 minutes when they're all over. So I thought, I'm just going to chronicle what happens every single day. So at least for one summer, I have a record of where this dang, summer went. And what happened was that my brother ended up getting worse. And the journal went from being a description of my Colorado adventures to a description of the pathology of his illness. And that is very much, my novel isn't a journal, but it uses the journal as part of the narrative. So that's very much the genesis of it.
Right. Okay, I'm going to my questions here in a moment and go to an audience question. And this audience member says, so far, a few of the books have been referred to as dark. Do you try to work a conscious balance with something like hope or happiness for the gay character? Or do you feel any pressure to consider hopefulness in gay stories? So who would like to take that on?
I'll comment on that first, if I may. I hate stories that end with the gay character getting killed, and it happens time and time and time again. No, there is always hope and there's always happiness in anything I write. And my novels tend to have happy endings, although there may be a lot of dark occurrences in it. It doesn't include wiping out one of the gay characters or LGBTQ as in my novel, because that covers all those characters. Or characters all happy. Didn't mean that as it sounded. I have a representative from all the communities in my books, and this novel in particular, so, as you know, Jerry. So, right.
How about you, Dave?
Oh, I definitely second what Lewis said. I very much feel a lot of hope and happiness in my characters. They love each other, and even though they have to be secretive about it, that love comes through, I think, in every single one of the books in the series. And I do that intentionally because I want to show that there is hope for the future. Even back in the 40s, I think a lot of people look back on that and say, oh, what tragic lives those men led. But I really think that's not necessarily the case. I think they were happy and they were contented and they did love and they did form lasting relationships. And I try to show that in my books. And I always try to show a happy ending too.
Excellent. How about you?
And by the way, I do feel like I'm either in Hollywood Squares or the Brady Bunch, intro series with all these different squares.
I know, right? St. John is in the Paul Lynde Square here.
Oh, thanks very much.
How about we turn to you next, St. John?
Sure. Well, I don't write about gay themes necessarily, so I don't feel any pressure to avoid killing the gay characters. And in Quake City, pretty much all the characters are gay. So, someone's got to die. Who's it going to be? I'm not shy about bumping someone off if they need to go, but you do need a mixture between having dark themes and lightening it up a little bit as well. And it's why I like using comedy a lot. I always write comedy because it makes real life funnier. It makes the darker things darker, and it makes the highs a little bit more pleasant as well. And even
Right.
though things end badly for some people. Like that's life. That's what happens. But things end positively for other people too.
Right. How about you, Lee?
So we're kind of talking about whether we have gay positivity and hope in our fiction. Is that the
Yes,
question?
the balance.
Yeah. I think that I just try to read the way things really are, the way I perceive them, whether they're really that way or not. But that there is homophobia out there. There is internal homophobia, and our beautiful heterosexual, everything about gay people, and all that whole spectrum is reflected in my writing. I try to lean it one way or another. I try to tell it like it is, the way I see it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and the only one that hasn't addressed this is Julian.
Yes. So, that's a good question. I think for me, more so for this horror anthology, I think, kind of speaks of itself. You have a lot of characters dying off in these types of situations, but for a lot of my previous written work, I am an optimist. So I had that happy ending where, I feel that what I would want to see out of life if I were that character, what would fulfill me is to have that person connect with someone, or give it that spiritual sort of ending where life is great. But more so than anything, I also feel that it's very important to really get the character and the person you're describing or writing about, to really give them a real sense of character, a real sense of life. And if you can bring that on and develop that clearly, to me, that's what makes it a really great story. For me, some of the best books are when not only do I sympathize or not sympathize with the character, but I really feel they're very vivid and they're very real and they give me emotion. And I think to me, that's really more of the key factor.
Okay. One of the things that I always am interested in, especially when we talk about writing about friends and family, is how they react. Do they recognize themselves? First of all, have you written about friends and family? Of course you have. We all know you have. Whether or not you admit that. Can your friends and your family recognize themselves in your work? Have you had that happen? And if so, how have they reacted to it? I assume they're all still talking to you. So maybe St. John, would you like to start that one?
Sure. I don't know that anyone has recognized themselves in anything I've written, although they're, like you said, they're definitely in there. But the main character in Quake City is basically, he's exactly the same as a friend of mine. And every time I see him, I tell him that I base the main character off him, because I wish I could have captured his hand gestures in the book, because he always has the same reaction. He'll go, no one's going to read this stupid book. Why are you going to be so weird? And I keep telling him because I catch him smiling when he thinks I'm not looking.
How about you, David?
Well, my characters are all definitely composites of people that I know. So I take a little bit from each person and build one character, I think. The main character of Heath is actually definitely a composite of myself and my husband, as well as Alan. So a lot of people say, oh, your main character Heath is you and Alan is Alan, but actually little bits of both of us are in both of them. I don't know as anybody's ever actually recognized themselves, because I don't strictly draw, this person.
Mm-hmm.
They're all composites for sure.
Mm-hmm. What does Alan think about being in your books? Does he love it? Does he?
I think he likes it. People always say, "Oh, I can hear his voice when the character of Alan is talking," or "I can hear your voice when the character of Heath is talking," which I think is flattering. I hope it's flattering. Heath is definitely better looking and a better dresser than I am, but he's a pretty good guy, so I'm happy with that.
Okay. How about you, Lewis?
It's been my experience, if I base a character too closely on someone I know or someone to whom I'm close, such as my husband, they come out two-dimensional. I take, like, I believe someone previously said, composites of people. The one character in Everyday People, who is based on someone I knew, well, actually, she was my cousin, now passed away, so that's why I felt pretty free in using her. You know, she was an astrologer, and in LA, and you know, so she won't recognize herself, but you know, but she was a fun character to write because she was so much, you know, I made her like my cousin. Other times, like my main character in this one has my husband's height, weight, build, so on and so forth. But he speaks as I do, I guess, more than as most authors, I think, main characters do. So it's, yeah, it's a mixture.
Okay, Lee?
Yeah, as far as I know, no one has ever like confronted me or told me, you know, that they recognize themselves in my fiction. But my little brother did call me out once when he told me that a situation that I'd set up in a novel that I published about 5 years ago was very much parallel to the lives of people we knew very well. And the truth is, I had borrowed aspects of those biographies, but in my mind, like someone used composite, which is a great word. I thought I was turning everything into a composite to the point that by the time I finished, based on the realistic situation. And then when my younger brother pointed it out to me, it was very obvious, but I had completely removed myself from that whole dilemma.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Very
I don't think I ever mentioned it to me directly, like a character. It's ever happened.
Okay. We're going to go back to the audience questions here for someone. Which one? Oh, this is the question.
Did you
How
ask a
much?
question?
Yes, it did. We're having difficulty catching up to your answer, Lee. Your internet connection may be a little slow or something. So we're not getting quite all of your answers.
Okay.
So if that sounds awkward, that's why.
I thought that you had asked me a question, but I couldn't. Okay.
Okay. So the question that the audience asked is, how much do you consciously write against the stereotypes might otherwise fall into? Give them a second to digest that. And
Well, if no one else wants to go ahead, I very consciously avoid stereotypes. There are some things, you know, that I don't know, when you're dealing with the LGBTQA community, you know, you're bound to get a little something that may be a reflection of someone in the community, but you know, we got enough crap to deal with. And as a retired lawyer, I can tell you, it gets frickin' ugly out there way too often still. You know, the old saying, the more things change, the more they stay the same. And, you know, I have an author friend who would disagree with me, you know, seriously on that statement, but just based on people I represented over the years, no. So yeah, I do consciously try to avoid stereotypes. Okay,
how about you, St. John?
It's tricky. I mean, it's not so much a trap you fall into if you're writing about like a group that you're a part of. For example, I'm not going to stereotype white people because I'm in that group. But it would be easy to stereotype if you had like a black character. It would be easy to I don't know, accidentally fall into stereotypes, which is why you want to have those characters, you need that kind of diversity in your books. But if I'm writing a trans character or a black character or something like that, then like I will try and take dialogue from my friends. I write down things that they say, and that's how I try and keep that authentic, so that I'm not impinging on a community that I have no right to represent or anything like that.
Okay, how about you, David?
Definitely always fighting against stereotypes, and I think my characters do that to some extent as well, partly because it is the 40s and they do have to be very closeted, so they're not going to be running around as stereotypical gay men sometimes are portrayed as doing. So in their lives, they're actually probably going more the opposite and trying to portray a more everyday Joe type of person. So I think, yeah, and I want to show my characters as not gay people necessarily, but people who happen to be gay. I think that's an important distinction. I don't write about gay people. I write about people who just happen to be gay, and not every character in my book is gay either. There's a lot of straight characters. And Verbena is one of my favorite characters. She's a hoot. And people tell me that they love her. So yeah, I definitely fight against any type of stereotype in any regard for any of my characters.
Okay, Julian, over here in this square.
I think David made a very good point, and I agree in what he said about what I write, and in terms of stereotyping, it's my characters happen to be gay, and whether it's horror or romance or other pieces of fiction I've written, it all comes down to, first of all, trying not to be create that stereotypical character, giving it life, and I think by doing that, it gives that story intrigue and drama, and it gives it credibility. And so I think it allows for it to speak, and definitely not the stereotype. And I think that's what makes a lot of the characters that we all write about unique, is they're not stereotypical. They're in a way different from, there's a story being brought out, and it makes it intriguing because of that.
How about you, Lee?
Yeah, I completely agree with what David and Julian were saying about, that just trying to write from this wellspring of reality, of real people and multidimensional people, and avoiding stereotypes. But I think sometimes I use stereotypes. It seems to me this happens in real life too, that people see themselves as stereotypes and they make fun of themselves for it. They try to avoid it, they try to deny it, but that would be the only time that I would take up the use of a stereotype is kind of in an ironic way, because I think it wars against good characterization, just in general, to stereotype rather than try to find the depth of someone.
Okay. And that's a perfect time for me. It's the flash sale from 7:40 to 9 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. 20% off gay titles, no pre-orders. And the website, the link will appear in the chat room here, and the coupon code is GAY, all caps, just like it should be, right? One of the things that I was thinking about is it's been said that all of our characters are autobiographical in some way. They're all a part of us in some way. And I wanted to know if you guys agreed or disagreed with that. And if you agree with it, which one of the characters that you have written cuts closest to the bone, and why? So who'd like to start that mess?
Well, that's a hard question, Jerry. As I say, a lot of people think that I write Heath as a reflection of myself, and I think I do to hopefully to a good extent, at least the good traits of them. Certainly, I like a good martini, and
There is no gin in here.
oh well, you know, I'm a vodka guy myself. But yeah, I definitely, to a great extent, I think Heath Barrington, my lead character detective, like I said, he's better looking and has a better wardrobe than I do, but I think he's very autobiographical, and you know, I definitely think there's a little bit of me and Aunt Rubina as well.
I could see that. How about you, Julian?
You know, it's funny. One of the things I learned when I was taking creative writing classes and back in college was the first things they would say is, don't ever write about yourself. You're not that exciting. Don't ever write an And the first short story I had published was an autobiographical short story. You know? And then, hence then, I've had several short stories that have been autobiographical experiences or whatnot. But I think for me, it's important, and I'm guilty in saying that a lot of my protagonists in certain fiction pieces are a lot about me, because I have to feel really connected with the character to be able to really express who they are, what they're saying, the things that the action, the reason why they're doing certain things. And so I think that I'm very guilty of it.
You know, I could tell it, man. But the second that I saw you, I actually thought about the ringmaster in Cirque du Freak, your title story, The Vampire.
Oh, yeah. I take that as a compliment.
Okay. How about you, St. John?
I think what Mr. Lopez said was 100% correct. You don't want to write necessarily all about yourself. You don't want to write, or I don't want to write an autobiography, but your feelings and your experiences, you have to use those. And, you know, I've got characters that maybe they've just gone through a breakup, or they're, you know, suffering from depression or something like that. So that can cut quite close to the bone, but that's all good stuff. Like, that's some of the best characterization. You can't make up those sorts of experiences unless you sort of do a lot of research and read a lot of psychological papers and you know, try and drag information out of your friends.
How about you, Lee?
Well, yeah, it's interesting. I didn't, my last book, Every Summer Day, is definitely has strong elements of autobiography in it, but more like the emotional autobiography of going through this with your family and your friends, rather than it actually following my real life autobiography. For example, and I don't teach history, and all those other small details about the character are not true. He's on cuts close to the bone to really answer the question.
That's very true. How about you, Lewis?
I mean, it's true to a point. As I mentioned earlier, my main character has my husband's physical attributes and my big mouth. And, you know, when you go to law school, you learn how to be lippy real fast. And as you practice over the years, it gets worse. And so, you know, I had to watch myself in writing, particularly for somebody who is a private investigator. And then with the one of the other secondary characters, LAPD Captain Hal Flynn, he kind of behaves like my husband. Do we now? Lines such as that. I don't know. Like I said, I try to avoid it, because when I base it too closely on either myself or someone else, it's two-dimensional, and even I can tell that. You know, I don't need an editor to tell me that. It's like, God, this stinks. You know, back off of this. So I try to make them up. Just make them up.
Well, one of the audience questions came up with something that I hadn't even thought about, and that is your audience. One of our attendees is curious is to, when you're writing your story, if you go back and change your original story to adapt what you think your audience might want to happen to those characters. So how much does audience play into the final genesis of the characters?
Hmm.
I mean, you have to think about audience because we have sales.
Absolutely.
So, and that might be a more of a series question, which might be more of David's field.
Yeah, it's interesting because I do get letters and emails from readers who tell me things. One of the most common things, which I actively fight against, for better or worse, is people keep saying they want more sex in my books. they want active sex, and but I think I try to write not just for a gay audience, but for every audience, and I try to think of my characters again. They're just people who happen to be gay, and there's certainly some romance. Some off-page sex, but it's not a graphic sex novel. It's a murder mystery. So I do fight against that part of it. There's a little bit where in my other book that'll be coming out after this next one, where he loses his virginity. It's a throwback to the old days before he meets Ellen. But overall, I always listen to and then respond to every letter I get and every email I get, and because obviously if the readers aren't happy, then the books aren't gonna go anywhere.
Right. How about the rest of you? How does audience affect what you do?
Well, if you bore your audience, you're in a lot of trouble. So you've always got to have your audience in mind. This is the first novel I've written that has no erotica in it to speak of. Most of the sex is off stage, and for the most part, and I know a lot of people who read, particularly fiction, really like a lot of sex and erotica. And my first 3 books were like that, written under another pen name, and that person shall remain nameless. I didn't like writing it, quite frankly. I spoke with other people who wrote erotica, and they said, "Oh God, I hate writing sex scenes." It's like, yeah, so do I. Yeah.
It's very interesting that you say that, because actually, my short story collection is called Strawberries and Other Erotic Fruits. So I do write erotica myself.
Yeah, but I liked it.
I'm really bored with writing the sex part. I like the setup. So, so I can. Okay, so we are just about ready to go here. So, any final thoughts from you, Dave?
No, I want to thank everybody for participating in this. I certainly have the greatest respect and admiration for the fellow panelists, and for you, Jerry, for all you do, and I always enjoy reading what you do as well. And Thanks. To all the readers and Bold Strokes books, it's been an awesome experience, and I look forward to a lot more to come.
Definitely. Julian?
Same, good luck to everyone. Right now we're in a weird time in the world, and obviously, even our outlet here, how we're communicating and sharing our information is interesting. So I think, there's more to be written about with what we're going through, and that in of itself is interesting. But just good luck to everyone. Thank you for everything. I think that this is great, and I wish everyone good luck.
Wonderful, thank you, Louis. Any final words? Louis?
I'm sorry. Were you talking to me?
Yes, any final words to it?
I'm sorry. Jaws was talking to me on my headset, and now it's doing it again. It's annoying the hell out of me. I would just invite everyone who enjoys modern detective thrillers, give my website a look and see if this is something you might like. Again, lewisbarrauthor.com. I'm going to pimp my book that way. And, I thank all the people who have read my other novels and will buy this one, I hope. And all the other panelists, it's been a pleasure listening to all of you. It really has. And Jerry, I got to know you pretty well. So during the editing process, and Strawberries and Other Erotic Fruit is really a great anthology.
Thank you.
I will pimp your book for you.
Thank you for the shout out. Write a review. St. John?
Yeah, thanks everyone for joining. It's been a real thrill. Stay safe and sane. Don't stab anyone over the last roll of toilet paper in the store. But if you do, write a book about it.
Our last words from Lee.
Yeah, I have the same feeling of this has been really interesting to hear what our writers, how they approach these questions. It's been great to see us again, Jerry, and after we kind of worked back and forth on the page together, and it's good to see you kind of all person.
Wonderful to see somebody's face after having worked with you all for so long.
Well, you didn't get to see mine because you can't buy a webcam anywhere right now, nor can you buy a monitor that has a camera in it. Jeez.
Okay. Well, thanks again. Thank you for attending, all 36 of you. You were been great. Thanks for the questions, guys and girls. Thanks for everything. It was a great panel. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.